We have got so much to learn. Thank you, Rich.
Thanks a lot. And it's a really great forum, and I really love the topic, so it's a privilege. So I think that the topic today, when I spoke to Laura a couple of days ago, we were looking at, you know, the effects of social isolation, lockdown, stress, our immune system. And as I started constructing the talk and the narrative, I realized that there's so much that we're going to actually have to basically make a two-part talk, and I've actually moved the immune system out of this talk, and there's good reason for it, and you'll see it as I start going down the narrative and taking you through this journey. So just to say that there is a whole section that's already prepared, it's really got on the immune system, but it would have made this talk exceptionally long, and I think that in order to really grasp some of the content and some of the information and be able to use it, it's better in smaller segments. I think another thing is that we can all agree our worlds have changed. The world will not be the same. So many of us are uncertain about where we are, where we're positioned. We are uncertain about our futures. We're uncertain about our relationships, how we communicate with people, supply chains, where we fit in, and everything. And this uncertainty is really impacting us on an incredible level and at a magnitude that we can't even begin to comprehend. But if you look at what a lot of the economists and a lot of the medical practitioners and a lot of the experts within the space are saying that this is the worst pandemic that the world has been confronted with, or the worst crisis the world has been confronted with since World War II. And I think that when you've got the UN Secretary General saying that this is the worst crisis since then, we have to stand up and take notice and take a deep breath in and be very proactive in terms of what we need to do for our futures and what the future is going to entail. But we also have these big economic impacts, and the economic impacts, when you've got the International Monetary Fund saying that it's compared to the Great Depression, actually is far worse than the Great Depression. We also had 160 countries this year that were showing promising growth, and we're looking at really robust economic movement. All of a sudden, in 3 weeks, 170 countries will be experiencing negative growth and potentially even a recession. So we're really in a place that no one would have anticipated, no one would have expected, and I don't think anyone's prepared for it. But what's really challenging at this point in time is that we have the convergence of two health epidemics. A couple of years ago, the World Health Organization stated or said that stress is the health epidemic of the 21st century, but now we've got the COVID-19 issue, the COVID-19 pandemic that's superimposed on stress. And these two elements, these two issues are converging and actually feeding each other. The more stressed we are about COVID-19, the more we corrupt our immune system, and the more we predispose ourselves to negative outcomes if we contract the virus, or predispose ourselves to greater susceptibility. We also have the fact that with this virus, so we've got stress limiting or impairing our immune system, and we've got the virus that's making us stress, and these two things are already impacting us in ways I don't think we can begin to imagine or understand. But what I think we really have an issue with at the moment is that there's this overwhelming current of worry, there's an overwhelming current of uncertainty. We feel completely out of control. And what we're worried about and what we feel out of control about is our health, our family's health, our relationships, what the impacts of social distancing are. But I think that the most prevailing worry, the most pressing issue that we're confronted with is the employment security issue, the financial future issue, the economic issues, whether you're in the States or whether you're in South Africa. We're confronted with the same thing. Now, in terms of the whole stress cycle, what typically happens is that we get stressed and we get worried, and it evokes a response within the brain. So the first region of the brain to react, or the first respondent, is the amygdala. So we've got this region of the brain, it's the fear center, it's the emotional center that reacts. And it sends a communication directly to the hypothalamus, who starts engaging our nervous system. So now all of a sudden we have, within literally a blink of an eye, before you've even processed it visually, you've got the adrenal glands pumping out adrenaline. We have norepinephrine and we have epinephrine flowing to the extent of around 300 to 500% increase in those hormones. Now, the most incredible thing about these hormones is that they actually offer us the potential to overcome adversity because they give us mental acuity. They strengthen our immune defenses. We actually have this radical mobilization of the immune system for 2 to 30 minutes. You have immune cells coming in from the bone marrow, from the spleen, from the lymph nodes. They're offering us support, offering us a defense in a crisis. We have greater availability of oxygen, making us clearer mentally, more oxygen in the brain, more glucose in the brain as well. We are stronger, we have pain resistance, and we're energetic. This is why the stress axis exists. It's there to help us overcome challenges. It's there to help us overcome circumstances where we need to find solutions. It's the biggest gift we've been given. The problem is that every time we get this adrenaline spike, what happens is a blood pressure surge. And this blood pressure surge has very negative effects on our brain and on our cardiovascular system. In fact, the blood pressure surges can induce a rupturing of some of the blood vessels within the heart and brain, increasing your risk of a heart attack or stroke by 30% if it's ongoing. So here we've got a system that was originally designed to help us cope and thrive in difficult and challenging circumstances. But if overstimulated and overactivated, it can actually cause trauma and damage. So that is the first area that is really vulnerable and very much affected. We also have the fact that this surge in adrenaline creates redistribution of blood. And the reason why is that the body looks at a stressful event or a stressful circumstance and asks the question, where do I need the blood the most? Do I need it in the digestive system? Do I need it in the skin? Do I need it in the reproductive system? Do I need it in the kidneys? Or do I need it in the brain, the lungs, the muscles? And the choice is not a choice. It's actually very obvious. Because when we have this wave of adrenaline, what happens is there's this redistribution of the blood to such a high magnitude that your skin is actually deprived quite substantially. And this is why so often we experience that situation or that feeling or that moment where you look in the mirror and we say, oh my word, what happened? I look so old today. And this is the effect of adrenaline and its ability to reallocate or redistribute blood reserves. But also it redistributes blood away from the digestive system, the renal system, the reproductive system. This is why so often when we're stressed for long periods of time, we have digestive issues. In fact, the digestive system gets compromised to the extent of around 400% reduction in blood supply in response to that adrenal surge, where the adrenaline and the noradrenaline have been released. The reproductive system is severely compromised. And this is why so many people struggle. If they've been stressed for long periods of time, urogenital issues, fertility issues, bladder issues. And this is all because of this recalibration that takes place. In the short term, it's powerful, it's useful, it's necessary. In the long term, it is destructive. And it doesn't stop there. It just begins there. Because what adrenaline and noradrenaline do is also increase tension in the muscular system. And this is why so often we experience tremendous pain in response to stressful events, whether it's neck pain, whether it's back pain, whether it's pain in specific locations of the body where we have vulnerability or pre-existing injuries. But this is the power, this is the effect of these hormones if dysregulated. One also has to realize that adrenaline's role is to protect us. And in the past, in our ancestral past, the dangers and the threats that we were confronted with were very much about microorganisms, whether it's conflict with an individual or another clan, or it's conflict with an animal, or a challenge that involves physical harm or trauma. Our immune system had to be ready and active to combat, whether it's bacteria, other microorganisms, viruses that needed to be ready and active. And adrenaline, as I mentioned before, its primary role, its primary function is to draw immune cells out of their reservoirs, put them into the bloodstream, and make them ready for a fight. Now, in the short term, that's amazing. These defenses can be harnessed, can be utilized. But in the long term, it can create a tremendous strain on the body, and I'm going to explain why. But this is just the beginning of a cascade. Now, this has all taken place in 3 minutes. And the process was initiated before you could even visually register the experience. But this sets up the second wave. This is the destructive wave. Once the hypothalamus in the brain receives those signals again, that adrenaline has been raised, the threat has not been removed, it triggers the pituitary gland to release a hormone that will invariably cause the release of cortisol, ACTH. So all of a sudden you have the adrenal glands working again, not now producing adrenaline, but producing cortisol. And by 15 minutes, cortisol is starting to flood through our veins. By 18 minutes, we've still got cortisol pumping and pounding and being distributed quite successfully. But the peak is around 30 to 40 minutes. And in the beginning, cortisol is exceptionally effective at modulating that immune response. Remember, adrenaline is drawing these immune cells out of the lymph nodes, the bone marrow. Cortisol is saying, okay, well, we need to put it somewhere strategically. Where are we going to put it? Nasal passages, mouth, throat, any of the vulnerable sites of the body. That's where the immune cells are going to be shunted. And that's what cortisol does in the beginning. It stabilizes the immune system as well. Adrenaline is about mobilize. Cortisol says, calm down, we've got this. Let's rather organize as opposed to mobilize. Cortisol also has very profound effects on metabolism. It can stabilize blood sugar. It maintains blood volume, blood pressure. In the short term, cortisol is highly advantageous. However, if cortisol has been in the system repeatedly, as it is the case now, you're looking at major disruptions in metabolic functionality. Metabolic functionality where you have a dysregulation of insulin, you can put on weight, your appetite changes, you crave sugars, you crave alcohols, you don't sleep well. All these shifts are results of cortisol, and that is just the beginning. Because cortisol, like adrenaline, also affects the digestive system. It corrupts the digestive system. In fact, it corrupts it in 6 different ways. And this is why stress and digestive issues go hand in hand. Because adrenaline starts the process, cortisol finishes the job. But it can also induce reflux. These are typical symptoms of an overexcited HPA axis, stress axis. But cortisol has other functions and other roles. And it's all about the supplying of energy at the end of the day. And it will break down connective tissue, bones, ligaments, tendons, muscles, in order to facilitate that energy demand, energy supply chain. So what you're invariably going to see is a breakdown in structure. Cortisol will break down your structure. Tendon injuries, bone injuries, ligament injuries, muscle injuries, aches, pains. That is the signature of cortisol. But cortisol in the short term has this amazing immune system response or immune system modulation effect. So it helps the immune system to regulate and helps the immune system to work really well. But when this stress hormone is in the body for prolonged periods of time, it suppresses the immune system, inhibits the immune system. But it also ages the immune system. And when our immune systems age to this extent, they don't work properly. They become completely dysfunctional. This being said as well is the fact that all these symptoms are mild. All these symptoms are moderate compared to the real danger that cortisol possesses, that cortisol has. Cortisol being a byproduct of stress in a chronic context. Because what cortisol typically does is it crushes the brain. It shrinks the brain. It's actually associated with atrophy in major areas of the brain. Prolonged cortisol will shrink 7 areas of the brain. And it's the areas that are responsible for intellect and emotional responses and clarity and everything that we need to overcome these difficult times and these challenges. Unfortunately, this hormone that was there to protect us has done a U-turn and all of a sudden is creating this carnage. But it doesn't only shrink the brain, it changes the composition of the brain. You get stem cell malfunction. Basically, the wrong tissue starts forming in the brain. The brain's made up of principally gray matter and white matter. Gray matter is like the hard drive and white matter is like the connections and the cables that put everything together. And when there's this raised cortisol in your body for long periods of time because of stress, the stress of uncertainty, the stress of a lack of control, the stress of what's next, the stress of high demands, you start forming more white matter, more cables and connections and less of a hard drive. The other thing that cortisol is associated with is a disconnection. The ability to change and adapt and find solutions in difficult situations is really centered around something called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form strong connections between regions and between cells. And cortisol has the opposite effect. It actually crushes that. If that wasn't enough, cortisol damages the one area of the brain that's responsible for regulating stress hormones themselves. It's called the hippocampus. And it's got so many receptors for cortisol that if you're flooding your body with cortisol all the time, this region of the brain gets damaged to such an extent that you can't turn off stress even if you wanted to, because this is the master regulator of shutting stress down. So these are the collective effects. If you have adrenaline in your system for protracted periods of time, cortisol in your system for protracted periods of time, you're likely to experience depression, digestive issues, anxiety, physical pain, cognitive decline, emotional changes, crying, aggressive outbursts, reduced attention and focus, lowered immune functionality. Any health issue that you have will be exposed. And it's just the beginning. The thyroid starts becoming dysregulated. There's a whole series of events that follows on from this. And this is part of the reason why we're looking at such a high prevalence globally of mental health issues. In South Africa, it's 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people in the work environment are suffering with depression. In the States, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6. In the UK, 1 in 5 and 1 in 6. In Europe, 1 in 3. And this is part of the driving process into that state of compromise. So the question is, where does one start? How do you remedy this? We can't change the circumstances that we're confronted with. It's impossible. We're in this movie for a long time. Until a vaccine is available, we're not going to be able to move forward freely and easily. Until a cure is found, potentially, we're not going to be able to move forward freely and easily. And we're looking at around 12 to 18 months. So we're in this situation, and we can't continue at this rate, at this pace. We can handle this for short periods of time, a month, 2 months, 3 months, no problem. We're resilient. But if this goes on for 5, 6, 7, 8 months, a year, 18 months, the effects are going to be extremely magnified, extremely destructive. So we have to know where to start, how to control this, how to be the best version of ourselves under very difficult and hostile circumstances. And the place to start is at the source. So the source of our fears and anxiety is a region of the brain known as the limbic system. But the limbic system has a central nucleus. It's called the amygdala. Actually, it's 2 of them. And this is where all our fears, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of the unknown, this is where everything is processed. So if we can tap into this zone, if we can make a difference here, we can change our reality. And then all the processes come along, the exercise, the diet, the nutritional supplements, the meditation, the yoga. Fantastic, highly advantageous. But this is the point of initiation. And what are the things that can actually tap into the emotional center of the brain? Well, interestingly enough, there's only a couple. And one of them happens to be essential oils. Now, if you look at the anatomy of the olfactory nerve, so this is the nerve here. A particle lands in this region here. The information then travels almost like on this highway. And here's the amygdala. It's one of the shortest points to the emotional center or the command center that we know. It's a highway. So here you have this direct and intense connection between the olfactory nerve and the limbic system. This is the only sense, or one of the only senses, that doesn't have to go through major processing systems in order to have its effect. It's instantaneous and it's extremely powerful. And when I've gone into a variety of studies looking at different oils and their effects on depression and anxiety and stress, I can safely say there is a wealth of literature, high quality studies some of them randomized controlled trials, showing how essential oils have the ability to regulate the stress axes, control anxiety, control worry, as effectively as some medications. And these were some of the oils that had tremendous research backing them: bergamot, lavender, chamomile, clary sage, neroli, lang lang, vetiver. There are more, and I think all of those individuals who use oils on a regular basis will say, well, you've left out this, you've left out that, you can name another 10. Of course there's another 10. But I chose the oils that had a tremendous amount of scientific backing behind them, because I grew up in a house where oils were, for my entire childhood, I grew up in a house where essential oils were part and parcel of life. And I have to admit, I had my frustrations and I had my doubts, because I would be feeling this way, I would apply this oil and nothing would change. And I didn't understand it. And I think a lot of us would have been in that situation where we say, well, this worked on that person. They said they felt amazing and nothing happened to me. Why? And the reason why is because of mechanism of action. Every oil that's on this list affects the brain in a very unique way. For example, lavender will affect serotonin. It will affect something called a voltage-gated calcium channel. Basically, it will limit over-arousal of the brain. It also affects the major resilience molecule, a protein in the brain that has the ability to create new connections in the brain, create cognition, and protect us from all the negative and adverse effects of stress on a structural perspective in terms of nervous system tissue, brain tissue. Bergamot affects the stress axis. It affects cortisol. So if my issue is serotonin, and that's why I'm stressed because my serotonin has plummeted, or I have genetic predisposition towards issues with serotonin, bergamot is not going to help me, but lavender will. Chamomile affects dopamine, affects cortisol, affects the stress axis. It affects serotonin. It's a very hedged oil. Neroli, serotonin, and GABA. GABA is basically a powerful neurotransmitter, a powerful brain chemical that calms the brain. And one of the primary effects of benzodiazepines, the strong anti-anxiety medications, is they influence GABA, but so do certain oils. And extremely effective in such a way that they're compared in many articles and many research papers to the effects of these strong medications, these benzodiazepines. So here you can see that every single oil has a different mode or mechanism of action. And when we apply these oils, we have to factor that in. If you want it to be successful, if you wanted to have the desired outcomes of affecting the amygdala, affecting the emotional center of the brain, affecting the other centers of the brain, so much so that you can alter your neurochemistry and you can alter your hormonal profile, you've got to hit the sweet spot. And how you hit the sweet spot is understanding genetics. And genetic panels are freely available. You can do them in the US, you can do them throughout the world at a relatively low cost. And this, for me, is my point of entry, because if you understand this, you understand how to apply the oils to ensure that they are as effective as they can possibly be. And as I said, that whole olfactory nerve, the connection between the nose and the brain, smells in the brain, the emotional experience of that sense in the brain is so powerful. We need to tap into this. And this is how we maximize its effectiveness and maximize its potential, is understanding genetics. So on the screen, I've got a panel. This is it's a South African panel. It's known as DNA Mind. And what it determines, what it looks at is around 37 genes that are responsible for emotional fragilities, emotional instabilities, stress responses, cognitive decline under pressure, and it looks at weaknesses and strengths. So this individual here, if they are going to have negative effects in response to stress, this particular individual here, it's going to come as a result of increased inflammation in the brain. And what increased inflammation does within the brain is it limits serotonin output, compromises dopamine output, increases excitability of our stress axes, makes us far more reactive to stress. But the most profound thing that happens in response to raised inflammation in the brain is the fact that you don't produce new brain cells, and we're producing them all the time. So if I were to say, how am I going to address stress in this individual who has a predisposition towards inflammation and all of their emotional vulnerability and emotional instability and cognitive decline is going to come through this pathway? This is the oil. At the same time, we scan down, we know that they have issues with serotonin. Tremendous issues in transport, in uptake, potentially even production because of the inflammation. And we know that lavender will neutralize, stabilize, and augment this process. Another panel will show you a very different thing. We're looking at a panel that will actually identify stress responses. In this individual, they have an inability to shut down stress. So when they get excited, when they get over-aroused, they can't shut down because of a gene variant in this area here. What oils are going to be successful? It's the oils that can control the stress axes. The bergamot, the chamomile, the clary sage. Those are the oils that are going to be most effective for this individual. At the same time, they also have an issue with something called BDNF, this protein that is our potential, that creates resilience, that creates agility on a mental plane. And if they were to integrate oils that are known to have a positive effect on BDNF, their reality changes. And this is the power of this tool, this modality. It's deep connection with our emotional centers and the rapid reactivity of our system to the stimulus. But it has to be fine-tuned. And this is a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for practitioners. It's a great opportunity for the industry to get specific. Look at the mechanisms of action, because you're going to be able to change lives on a level and in a way that you haven't been able to this point before, understanding this. But there's another interesting point here. And that is when you superimpose the use of oils into other modalities that are associated with a reduction of stress. And in this instance, it's going to be massage. There was a very interesting study. It was a really good study. It involved 25 subjects, and the subjects were women who had children with sensory processing disorders or ADHD. A very stressful situation for anyone. Now, what the researchers did is they randomly assigned the 25 subjects. 13 went into a massage group where they'd have a massage twice a week for 40 minutes over a month. The other group, nothing. And the massage oils they used was lavender and geranium. And what they wanted to see was, does the application of the oils in this context actually adjust one's perception of stress, affect one's neurochemistry, chemicals in the brain, and affect the proteins that are instrumental in ensuring that we are resilient and we can move forward. So that's what the research team was looking at. So what they found after a period of 4 weeks, testing everyone before, testing everyone again, is that only the group that went through the massage process with the oils had reduced scores on 3 major stress tests. What was most profound is that their brain waves had altered. They were favoring alpha, which is a very tranquil and calm state. They also noticed an increase in BDNF, this protein that is adaptability, and we need to be adaptable. And then they observed that there was a change, a lowering of the stress hormone cortisol, but it only lasted for a few hours post-session. What happened? That's a strange finding. So when they looked at it, they realized that the cortisol before and after was almost identical, but before and after the massage, there was a radical reduction, which couldn't be explained. But in other studies, they've shown that massage will lower cortisol by about 30% for a period of a couple of hours. So the cortisol that had dropped in response to the massage or in response to the session wasn't because of the oils, it was because of the massage. And that's why it didn't have a lasting effect. But if I go back a couple of slides here, I'm going to show you the effect of lavender. lavender does not have effect on cortisol, but it does have an effect on BDNF. And it does have an effect on voltage-gated calcium channel. Basically, this is why brain waves were positively affected through the application of that oil, partly through this voltage-gated calcium channel. So this really reaffirms the message, and the message is mechanism of action, how these oils work and how they can be applied. The interesting thing is that everything I've described now is very specific to the events that have unfolded, the circumstances that are more broad, the situation that we're worried about, the future. But nothing is addressing the now, what is happening now to all of us. 3 billion people around the world are in some sort of quarantine or lockdown. 3 billion people. It's unprecedented. When they compare it to World War II, nothing outside of the casualties and lost lives. But in terms of global impact, there's no precedence for this. Now, quarantines are very interesting because they start well. So you get into a situation that you're not driving to work, you're not in the traffic, you're not rushing meeting to meeting to meeting. There's no conflict with anyone. You're in this solitary and serene state. Brilliant. Fantastic. You're going to make the most of it. If you've got kids, this is what starts to happen. And what the research has shown extensively is that by day 10, by day 11, by day 12, something happens in quarantine. Something happens in a lockdown situation. All of a sudden, from going from this romantic notion, this incredible feeling of united, collective, serene, tranquil, it becomes an environment that becomes extremely stressful. An environment that induces stress, induces anxiety. Now, it was very timelessly published because there was an article or a study published in the Lancet Journal, and it came out about 2-3 months ago. And it was looking at the impact of social distancing and quarantines on our health, mental health, stress, well-being. And it went through the literature to the extent of sifting through almost 4,000 studies on quarantine. But only 24 were high quality. 24 studies could provide answers to questions that the researchers wanted to ask. Now, the researchers were from, I think it was King's College in London, or it was from one of the other top universities in London. And the Lancet Journal is the second best medical journal in the world. The credibility of the study is irrefutable. And what they looked at was, within these 24 studies, was 10 different countries. How the people in those countries were affected by quarantines. The length of the quarantines, they lasted anywhere from 2 to 30 days, averaging around 20 to 30 days. And the quarantines were in response to 3 big viruses. SARS, which has an 82% compatibility with COVID-19. MERS, which is the lethal form of a coronavirus. I think it's a 30% mortality rate. And Ebola, another lethal virus. And the researchers were looking at the impact across 10 different countries with different lengths of times of quarantine with these serious viruses and the impact that it had on people, on individuals. And what they found was what we're all experiencing, is that quarantines induce stress, quarantines induce anxiety, quarantines induce fear, irritability, confusion, insomnia, anger, low mood, depression, sadness, emotional disturbances, and just become emotionally exhausting. That is the effect of a quarantine over a period of time that exceeds 10, 12, 14 days. But what was most concerning is that a lot of individuals experience post-traumatic stress symptoms from quarantines for up to a period of 3 years. The thing is about this research is that it wanted to identify what was it about a quarantine that induces this state. Some of us are in environments where we've got families, and that causes a lot of stress. Some of us are in isolation, that causes a lot of stress. Some of us are in bigger houses, some of us in smaller apartments. Our circumstances are all different, yet the outcomes seem to be quite similar. So they identified 7 things that cause disturbances and cause stress and anxiety, depression, and sleeplessness as a result of a quarantine. And these seven things included the uncertainty of whether this quarantine is going to be the last, if it's going to be extended. We recently experienced a 21-day quarantine that went to a 14-day quarantine, and now there's talk about a 14-day release and back into quarantine. Many parts of the world have had extension on quarantines. Some regions of the world, based on a UN statement or World Health Organization statement, are actually going to tighten up their quarantines from a relatively relaxed state to a much more aggressive state. And these are the fears that play out when we're in these isolated environments. How much longer can I endure this? How much longer do I want to endure this? How much longer can I not see my friends? How much longer am I not going to be able to interact and just engage in life? And this is a big stress for us, because uncertainty is one of the biggest drivers in anxiety. Then we have the constant fears of infection. Some days they're stronger, some days they're not. A good example is, I'm quite familiar with the mechanism of action of the coronavirus. I've spent a lot of time investigating it. A couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine sends me this routine, this workout on an assault bike, which I've got here. It's like a very vigorous workout, and I'm intrinsically competitive. And I attempt this workout. It's way too hard for me. He's much stronger than me. And I don't really do particularly well, but I try my best. And I'm like breathing very heavily, breathing in a lot of dust. And invariably what happens is I lose my voice, my chest gets tight. And a couple of hours later, I'm convinced I've got COVID-19. I haven't been exposed to anyone. I haven't left the house. But I'm convinced, just based on this being in the solitary environment, all reason and all logic out the window. But then part of that's because of the third thing that was identified by researchers. The third thing is that there's so much misinformation out there. I mean, there was information going out in the beginning where if you used a hair blow dryer on your body and in your mouth and up your nasal passages, that would kill COVID-19. You would be safe. And I think there's been other creative solutions to managing this virus, which have been equally as ridiculous. Whether it's coming through on a WhatsApp group, whether it's coming through on Facebook, it doesn't matter where it's coming from, but there's so much misinformation. And the misinformation really makes us doubt ourselves and doubt the situation and doubt the NGOs and doubt the governments in terms of what their action plans are. We also have the fact that there's frustration in isolation. Just the simple thing of just going for a walk for South Africans is very tough. Can't go for a walk. It's a frustration. And that induces depression. Frustration induces sleeplessness. This feeling of being trapped, just wanting to, that element, that touch or taste of freedom. We don't have that luxury. Then for some, there's the boredom factor. If you've got a young family and you're doing homeschooling or online schooling, probably boredom is not going to be a word I would use in the sentence. But at the same time, you're doing very repetitive tasks. So is it boredom, or is it maybe you're busying yourself? But the repetitive nature of a task can become extremely boring. And boredom is a known stressor. In fact, there was a study that involved 40,000 people over a 30-year period of time looking at different stresses and health outcomes. And what they found is repetitive tasks induce stress to the extent that it compromises health dramatically, increases your risk of developing certain diseases by 300%. Just repetitive tasks. So boredom is a factor, whether you're in isolation, you have a lot of work, you don't have a lot of work, whether you've got a family, it's a factor. Inadequate supplies was the 6th point on the list. Not being well equipped, and I'm not talking about groceries. I'm not talking about having everything that you need from that standpoint. I'm talking about the little things that you never thought of, whether it's certain batteries or certain electronics or certain things that are going to make your life a lot easier under very difficult circumstances. And that becomes a stress because you have the frustration of not being able to leave the house. But the prevailing sentiment, and we can all testify to this, with lockdown in a quarantine situation is undoubtedly fear of our financial future, the uncertainty that goes with it, the losses that we're incurring in response to the lockdown. No one's unimpacted, no one. So these are the 7 things that were driving stress. And remember, we've got enough to worry about. This is just compounding the situation. But where this research study was so powerful is it didn't only want to identify what are the factors that drive stress under lockdown. It wanted to identify what are the factors that can resolve this, and identified 5 things. 5 things that are in our hands. The first is knowledge. Knowledge is certainly power. So if we understand the pandemic, we understand its spread, its risks, the trends, the safety precautions, it's a very liberating experience. We often feel that we don't want to expose ourselves to more information because of fears and uncertainty. It does the exact opposite. The more we expose ourselves to this type of information that is pertinent, that's relevant, that's credible, the more it actually takes a weight off our shoulders. The more we can actually refine our emotional state to a state of acceptance of a reality. And through that acceptance of reality, we can formulate an action plan. The problem with updates is that if you're getting updates through a WhatsApp group, sometimes through Facebook, sometimes through Instagram, credibility might be lacking. For me, the updates have to come from a reliable source, a credible source. And ironically, I don't use the CDC, I don't use the NHS, not that they're not credible, they're highly credible. The World Health Organization. I use the World Economic Forum, independent. And the updates on a regular basis have really helped me understand. Every day they have what's happening with COVID-19 today. A couple of lines. And it just gives me a lot of peace, a lot of comfort in knowing where we stand. The second thing that the researchers identified was that if you're able to limit frustration and limit boredom, your reality transforms. So limiting boredom is limiting the repetitive nature of your day. Now, in order to achieve this, it's about one thing and one thing alone. It's about meaningful engagements. And some of us don't have the time to have these meaningful engagements. And we have to set aside time, whether it's half an hour, whether it's an hour. Life is busy now because there's a lot more time communicating on platforms about solutions in the future. There's a lot of time managing kids that you didn't have to manage because they're at school. So although it's a great concept to say, let's learn, let's upskill, let's read, let's exercise, some of us don't have that opportunity. But the opportunity you have to create within that space is something meaningful, something that you can walk away after a lockdown or quarantine period and say, I've grown in this period. It wasn't easy, but I have grown. And this really ties into where the future was going in the first place. What's happened now with this quarantine and the lockdown situation, the coronavirus, is the fact that everything that was likely to happen over a 15-year period of time with the fourth industrial revolution and the recalibration of the world and the way it operates happened in 3 weeks. Everything was headed in that direction. And whether it's a World Economic Forum, the ILO, any of the major organizations that are really about social upliftment, the only remedy that we have is skills. If you want to make yourself relevant, you've got to upskill. You've got to learn. This is the time, whether you have the time or don't, you've got to make the time to learn, upskill, and read. And that will take a tremendous weight off your shoulder from an emotional standpoint. Might put a little bit more pressure in terms of scheduling. But this is an immeasurably valuable period. Use it. The third point was adequate supplies. Being able to supply yourself successfully and sufficiently. And it goes beyond having chickpeas. It goes beyond having tahina. It goes beyond having everything at a tin tuna. It goes beyond lettuce and it goes beyond broccoli. Far, way beyond that. Because when we feel we are adequately supplied, we create a sense that we have control and order in our lives. And what's lacking now is exactly that. We have no voice. We have no control. We have no certainty. The future is chaotic. The present is chaotic. And when we start when we are able to create mini controls, mini structures within our own personal lives, it's extremely relieving. It gives us the sense that everything will be okay. It's proven in the literature, and I think that we can all testify to this experience in our own lives. And that's why being adequately supplied is central to overcoming the emotional and mental challenges of lockdown. The fourth point was the connection piece. And when the lockdown started for many countries, there was a big narrative, and the narrative was that lockdown is not about emotional distancing, it's about physical distancing. 100% right. And we've got all these platforms, we've got video chats, we've got Zoom, we've got the ability to make calls anywhere in the world all the time at almost no cost. We've got social media platforms. We've got this wealth of communication channels that we can access at any given time. But it all starts well. First 10 days, people are communicating, they're engaging, they're supporting. And then human nature kicks in. Because what is our nature? Our nature is to withdraw. In a crisis, we actually don't connect. We don't communicate well because society has conditioned us otherwise. Society has no tolerance of weakness. Society has no tolerance of failure. Society has no tolerance of vulnerability. And we condition ourselves over the course of our life to always project this impression of everything's great, everything's amazing, I've got this. But in reality, it's not the case. How many people have you called up and you said, how are you doing? Oh, never been better. This is the best thing I've ever experienced. Love it. Meanwhile, they wake up in the morning and struggle to get out of bed because that's the facade that they're expected to put on. The thing is about withdrawing is that it's extremely destructive because we've been in a situation where we've been exposed to radical climate change, hostile environments, famines. This is the 7th coronavirus that we've been exposed to. The coronaviruses date back to 3,300 BCE. And they're much more deadly viruses. And we've come through all of that. We've been in wars, we've been in conflicts, we've been in countless food shortages, and we've come through it. How have we come through it? By uniting, by being a collective. And while you could identify this concept in the beginning of the lockdown, now's the time to fight your nature to introvert, your nature to withdraw, your pretenses, expose your vulnerabilities, share your experiences, force yourself to connect, do everything that goes against the grain. Because this is how we achieve, this is how we overcome anything. This is a very, very clear message. And it ties in to the last point that was identified by this team of researchers. And the last point was about extending yourself. Because most of us have been in preservation mode or preservation of our family mode. But we have to understand, we have to realize that the world is absolutely challenged with mental health issues, vulnerabilities, be it health or other. So many people we know, so many people that are not outside our circle, in our circle. At least 1 in 4 people within your circle are affected by either depression, anxiety, sleeplessness, or common mental health disorder. And these are the individuals who are not coping. These are the individuals who are really struggling with the crisis that we're confronted with. And these are the individuals that we have to reach out to, reconnect to. We've been so fixated on our small nuclei that sometimes we forget of the vulnerabilities and the fragilities that exist just one step beyond our families. But the interesting thing about extending yourself and expressing care and being charitable and offering support and being empathetic and compassion is that something incredible happens when we perform in this way, we act in this way, when we engage with people in this way. We activate a hormone or molecule known as oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is the second trigger or stimulus for the emotional command center in the brain. When we release this hormone, and we release this hormone by physical engagements, either material physical engagement, being with some eye contact, or through pro-social activities, care, support, empathy, compassion, our behavioral nature shifts. It shifts to a state of fearlessness. What are we crippled by now in response to cortisol? Fear. We become empathetic. What does cortisol do? It makes us self-centered. We become calm. What does cortisol do? Make us anxious. We have self-esteem. What does cortisol do? Absolutely corrodes our self-worth and esteem. We connect with people. What does cortisol do? Disconnects. Cortisol is a pessimistic hormone. Oxytocin is an optimistic hormone. We have trust in others, and we really believe in ourselves and that we can get through anything. This is the profile, the emotional profile of this powerful hormone that is released in response to only three things. One is the initial wave of stress, and it's only in the system for 6 minutes. 2 is physical contacts on all levels. And 3 are pro-social engagements, care, empathy, charity, compassion. But it doesn't just have an emotional profile or an emotional set. It goes well beyond that, because oxytocin actually is an anti-inflammatory molecule. It's a neurochemical and a hormone. And what is one of the biggest issues with stress? It raises inflammation. And if we get into an inflamed state, it affects our brains. If we create neuroinflammation, our production of key neurochemicals like serotonin and dopamine decline. Our stress axis becomes volatile and unstable. We don't produce new brain cells. And oxytocin is the antivenom. Oxytocin also is reparative. It actually repairs the body, whereas cortisol is breaking it down, tearing it up, and spitting it out. Oxytocin causes an increased release in growth hormone and insulin growth factor 1. It repairs and rebuilds the body. But it also lowers blood pressure, just as an aside. It lowers heart rate, just as an aside. It has antioxidant qualities, so it decelerates the aging process. The most amazing thing about stress is that it accelerates aging quite profoundly. There was a study that was published a couple of years ago by a Nobel Prize winner for medicine, and what they were looking at was the effects of chronic stress on the aging process. And what they did was they took cell samples from a group of, I think it was about 50 individuals, and they did self-evaluations on their degree of stress and their level of stress in their lives. 3 groups emerged. One group reported no stress. The other group reported sporadic stress. A little bit here, a little bit there, comes and goes. The last group reported ongoing stress, exactly where we are now. But what the researchers wanted to do, they wanted to look at the effects of stress on our cells, our age of our cells. So what they wanted to do was chronologically and biologically match the individuals. Take their cells, look at how old they were, and match the cell age to their chronological age. And what they found in the group that wasn't stressed, if they were 35, they were 35. Their cells were the exact same age. The group that had sporadic stress was stressed intermittently. It came, it went. No change, nothing. The group that was exposed to chronic stress over a 2-year period of time, their cells aged by almost 2 decades. And that is the movie we're in. The only real anti-venom we have is to tap into this oxytocin system. And I am almost convinced there are oils that can do this. I'll just have to look into it. Oxytocin is the master anti-stress molecule. But if that wasn't enough, it spikes serotonin. It spikes BDNF. So it affects our structure. It affects inflammation. It affects our blood pressure. It's reparative. It's antioxidant. It affects our neurochemistry. This is what we need to tap into. But most importantly, oxytocin affects the brain. And it affects that fear center. It inhibits it. When we release oxytocin, we do not feel that fear. We do not feel that uncertainty. And how do we release it? Care, empathy, compassion, support. So we always assume that when someone is in crisis and we offer our support and we motivate them and help them through what they're experiencing, we always thought that the beneficiary was them and we give ourselves a pat on the back, we helped someone. The truth is they are beneficiary. But the primary beneficiary is us. Because when we step out of our comfort zone, when we're in crisis, when we push ourselves, when we're in crisis, to connect to community, to connect to those who are more vulnerable, we have a major biological shift. A major biological shift that favors biological integrity, emotional integrity, physical integrity. We are protected from stress. And this brings me to the last study that I want to bring up. And it was a study that was performed by a team at Yale University and the University of California, a collaborative study looking at a group of individuals exposed to stress over a 2-year period of time, looking at how stress affected them on a health level, the magnitude and the number of stresses they were confronted with, and the number of pro-social engagements that they performed over that period of time. Pro-social engagements being charity, giving of your time, offering support. So what the researchers found was those individuals who were stressed over a long period of time had a fragility in their health. That's an understood. Stress affects mental health negatively, confirmed. But what they also identified is that the average person outside of a very difficult situation that we're in now will experience about 5 stresses a week. They'll also, the Good Samaritan that is, perform 11 pro-social behaviors, 11 acts of kindness in a week. That seemed to be the sweet spot. And what they noticed over a 2-year period is those individuals who performed less than 11 acts of kindness a week, their health was more impacted by stress, especially mentally and emotionally, than those individuals who didn't. Then they started looking at those individuals who performed more pro-social behaviors, went beyond, exceeded them, the 11. And those individuals were completely protected from stress. Stress did not affect their mental health. And this is the power of this hormone, and this is the power of our actions and behavior. Where I want to end or land today is really that we're in a very challenging period in human history. And we can see it in a very negative context. We can become overwhelmed by fears, overwhelmed by uncertainty, overwhelmed by the circumstances that we don't understand. Or we can see it in another way. And the way is that this is a growth opportunity that we'll never again be confronted with or given. This is an opportunity to recalibrate our lives, change the order of our lives, change the nature, change the cycle of our life, change the patterns. We'll be forced into change. And if you really want to come out of this, the best version of yourself, because that's our goal in life, is basically to take the potential that we've been given and bring it out. This is the time to educate yourself. This is the time to advance your professional skills. This is the time to build relationships, and it's the opportunity to build relationships, because so often our relationships were fragmented and destroyed by either the proximity, not appreciating the relationships. Now, through the distancing, we appreciate people more. We're more tolerant, we're more compassionate, we're more caring of them. The relationships that we neglected are in a circle. We've had more time to reinvest in. This is a time to really focus on personal health, because we have no choice. We're probably likely to be in this situation, confronted with the challenges of COVID-19 and beyond for the next 12 to 18 months. So this is the time we have to become healthy. We have to augment our immune systems. We have to focus on the things that we can control. This is the opportunity for self-development. This is the opportunity for growth. Don't waste it. We're all confronted with fears, but fears can be overcome by actions. And these are the actions that I believe to be extremely necessary and beneficial in this time. So to summarize, we're overwhelmed by uncertainty, a lack of control, worry. We now have stress at unprecedented levels. It's impacting our physical health, our mental health, our immune health, even induces chronic diseases. If we are going to control it, we need to tap into the emotional command centers. And these command centers are fundamentally governed by a region. One region is called the amygdala. And anything that can tap into this, the amygdala, can offer you an opportunity to overcome the biological challenges of stress. You can't overcome the circumstances that you're confronted with, but you certainly can change your biological responses. We also know that there's an additional stress from social distancing. That's going to continue for a long time. Quarantines add an extra layer to that. And our weapons in this journey, the first step of a very comprehensive journey, are essential oils, understanding the mechanism of action, and the power of pro-social behavior. It really transforms the experience of stress. It transforms one's life. And that's where I'd like to leave it today.
Richard, that was amazing. I don't know if you have, hopefully you're not following the chat because it would have been very distracting to you, but there are so many messages of how much people want a recording of this, which I am doing. So everyone will get a recording, and we just so appreciate your time. And your
it's such a pleasure. It's such a great opportunity, and thank you for allowing me this vehicle.
We're excited to hear about part 2, so we'll have to regroup on that.
Yeah, So that really is our approach to our immune system, because with a stronger immune system, one, if we are exposed, we have a greater propensity towards limiting the risk of infection. With greater immunity, if we do catch the virus, or we become susceptible to the virus, our recovery will be far quicker. Our immune responses will ensure that the symptom set is less. One of the biggest issues with the virus is something called a cytokine storm, where the immune system becomes totally dysregulated. And this is where understanding our immune system and understanding immune hacks is going to become extremely valuable. And that's a journey that we can't take for a week, we can't take for a month. We've got to take it for the next 2 years. And I'm excited to present that. But I think you can see now why, this was a full hour, and that's a full hour. It would have been, I think, a bit of an overload in terms of information.
It was amazing. It was amazing. So I'm going to stop recording.